Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Combat Zone. This is the place where the enemy only has four things to say: abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and surrender. My name's Nick. He's Joseph. And we bring to you every Wednesday night 2 hours of the best conservative commentary on the news and on the happenings around the world that you'll find anywhere on the internet. At least we like to think so. So tonight on the show, I'll let Joseph get here in a second. We've got all kinds of things.
You're going to let me get in here?
Yeah, because when I start talking, I'm like a runaway freight train downhill. And I have to be slowed down. You know the song, The Wreck of the Old 97? They wrote it about me. It's not a song about a train. It's a song about me and what it takes to get me to quit talking long enough for somebody else to get a word in edgewise.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You've never heard The Wreck of the Old 97?
No, I've never
by
heard.
Hank Snow.
Who's Hank Snow?
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Okay. Hank Snow, The Golden Rocket, Apple Blossom Time.
Sorry, guys. No
He's
idea.
from Nova Scotia. He sold 50 million records.
In Nova Scotia?
No, in Nashville. But he's from Nova Scotia.
Okay, I trust you.
I can't believe you've never heard The Wreck of the Old 97.
I'm afraid I haven't. Sorry.
She is going.
I've
out.
lived a
He's
sheltered life.
90 miles an hour. Never mind. I'm not going to sing it to you. Anyway.
Number to call if you want to talk to Nick about The Wreck of the Old 97. Toll free anywhere in North America, 844-415-2115, 844-415-2115. And if you're listening on the live player, which obviously you are, because we're on the internet, not in terrestrial radio, if you want to get involved in the chat room, get on, click on the chat bubble, register if you haven't registered, and have your say. And look, guys, keep it clean, will you please? This is a family-friendly broadcast. I'm running out of things to say, Nick. Come on.
Already?
Go.
We only just started.
Wake up.
I'm just responding. I'm looking after the chat room. You're supposed to kick. I kicked the show off. Okay.
Oh, yeah, what are we talking about here?
Okay,
Come on. What's going on with not elections? See if my brain is locked into Elections Canada. What's happening with Stats Canada? I hear they're doing some kind of crazy stuff, gathering top secret personal data information on people's credit scores and all this stuff. Tell me what's happening. I only heard this briefly today, so it's new information for me.
Really?
Yeah, go on, quick.
Oh, I have no idea. No, I'm kidding. I just want to see the look on your face. No, Statistics Canada, because their excuse is because the Harper government canceled the long-form census, which was invasive, intrusive, and unnecessary, at least in my opinion, asking all kinds of questions they had no business asking. Because for me, from a statistical point of view, the only thing the government really needs to know about the citizens that live within its borders from a statistical point of view is how many people live in a household, what the average income is in that household, and, a few other little things like that. But they were getting into, who you were living with, what kind of, how you identified yourself. There was all kinds of information that was considered personal that they were gathering. Well, Stephen Harper canceled that, went back to the short form. And everybody went, yay. Well, StatsCan doesn't like that because it's made up of a bunch of statisticians. Imagine that. StatsCan has statisticians in it who like raw data. And the more accurate that raw data is, the better they'll like it. And their excuse is they use that to help the government form policy about welfare programs and all these other expensive programs that we may or may not need. So what they've done is because of the canceling of this, and this is as I understand it. I was listening to it today. I've read a couple stories about it online from Global and a bunch of different sources. And in a nutshell, StatsCan has gone to Transnational, which is one. There's Equifax and Transnational, the two credit rating bureaus. Like when you go to get a mortgage on a home, or you go to buy a car, or you go to get a credit card, they track your credit. Like if you're late on payments, or if you have, what your credit history is like. And that determines in large part whether or not you're going to be qualified for the loan. It's something a tool the banking system uses to make sure the people who borrow the money actually have the means to pay it back. So I'm not necessarily against that. But what they did was went into StatsCan went into this organization and said, you must give us name, rank, serial number, all the banking information, everything you've got on 500,000 Canadians this year. Now, as far as I know, it's as of January 1st. So I don't know if the transfer has actually taken place yet. I could be wrong. It may have already happened. But the question becomes, what do they want that information for? Because if they said, look, strip away the name, the social insurance number, the address, and anything that identifies this information with a particular individual, most people probably would not have a problem with it. The problem is that's what they want. They want all that information. And so Transnational has no choice because StatsCan says, we have the power. So they go in and they do that. Well, now they want to do the 9 big charter banks. Now think about it. If you're head of CIBC or you're head of the Royal Bank or you pick whatever not one of the big 9 banks you want, what's the very first thing that's going to cross your mind? Well, as soon as my clients find out about this, as soon as my depositors find out about this, they're going to run off to all these smaller credit unions and smaller banks that don't fall under this umbrella. They're going to have people moving money offshore. They're going to try to hide that information because it's none of the government's business in the first place how many times you went to an ATM, how many checks you wrote, who you wrote them to. This is the kind of information they want. And they want to create this living body of information based on real-time numbers on real Canadians with names and rank. And they say they're going to what's the term they use? Make it anonymous by the time the government actually gets it. But I'm sorry, given the breaches in security we've seen in the last couple of years, in not only in business but especially in government, I mean, I don't trust them. I just don't trust them. The government doesn't need this information. They can, if they were going to be just getting the raw data itself without any identifiers or flags on it about who it belongs to, I think most people wouldn't have nearly the trouble with it. But this is what's going on, and it's going to be 500,000 people this year, and then 500 people next year, and 500,000 the year after that.
So I don't get it though. Didn't you have to? On the census, don't you have to put your name on it anyway? So wasn't Statistics Canada getting some of that data, that personal information, in such a way that they could match up the statistical data that you're providing with the names? I understand some of the data that they were getting before. This is beyond that.
This goes way beyond that. Yeah.
Your credit rating, for instance.
Yeah.
I mean, the only reason that you would get information from a credit bureau is if you want credit ratings, the number of times you've applied for a loan, the number of times you've been turned down for a credit card, how many credit cards you have. So I don't recall that this is information that Statistics Canada typically gathered on even the long form census, the long form census page, or the long census form, or now I'm lost. I don't even know what they used to call it.
Well, let me help flesh this out a little bit, because based on the conversations I was listening to today and some of the research that I did, China is doing something they called social credit, and they do the same thing. They gather all that information about their population, and they can move them up and down in society. If you want to advance within the Communist Party of China, okay, it all depends on your social credit score. If you want a better job, in other words, they can manipulate that data to manipulate you. And it's another way of controlling the population. And this is very similar to what they've done. There's also another precedent for this, going back into the 1920s and 30s when Mussolini was in power in Italy. Now, he didn't have the means, the technological means to do it as broadly as what we see now. But in effect, what he did was he went in and he raided people's personal bank accounts and just drained them. He just took the power and said, that's it, I need that money because, economic times are hard and the government has to fund all this expansion, and he was building his military and all that stuff. So he went in and just said, I've actually read a book that had a picture of a receipt given to a 90-year-old woman. Now, I don't know how much 1,000 lire which I think is the Italian currency, was worth, let's say it was 1935 in Italy, how much that is actually in real dollars today, I don't know. But if she's in her 90s, she knows she's not going to get that money back. And that might have been all she had to live on. So the problem with power like this, it's, imagine if you, let's say that you borrow $25,000 because you want to renovate your home, something like that. And you say, if we had, if we go and make this little purchase, it's only a couple $100 because we still have to renovate the home. Let's go buy something that we've always wanted and would really make our lives easier. So you take $300-400, and then something else pops up. Say, having that used model, that 2-3-year-old car would save us a lot of money on insurance, and it's worth spending $3,000-4,000 on. Yes, it takes away from that $20,000, the $25,000 you want. Before long, if you keep that up, the money's gone. And that's the way that power works. If you give them that kind of power, they may not have nefarious intent to begin with, but they'll nibble away at the constraints until there are no constraints left. And who knows what they'll do with it. I'm not saying for a second that right now, today, the government's going to do anything really nefarious with this information. But to give them that kind of power, that kind of information, is a huge temptation for misuse and abuse. And that's what's really got me worried about this, is even if they are completely honorable with their intentions today, we have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow with that information, because once it's in their hands, we can't get it back.
Okay, I'm thinking about this. It's, the wheels are sort of churning, and if you can't smell the smoke, well, maybe they're not churning and churning enough. I
can smell it.
I don't know. Look, I don't know if I'm as upset about this as you are. I understand the idea of limiting government power, but they already have the power to get this information. That's part of the problem, right?
But they have to get a judge. They have to have a warrant. You can't just go in and take somebody's information without telling them and without their consent.
Now, are you saying that because you know it, or are you saying that because you assume it?
No, based on what I was learning today, that's the truth. If they want to go in and get your personal financial information, they have to show. Let's say, as an example, and I'm going to steal from my colleague Rob Snow. He made a good point today. He said, let's pretend, I'll use myself as his example, that Nick Vandergraat's a drug runner, okay? And he's got $1 million behind the drywall in his basement. And the cops know it. They can't just kick in the door, take sledgehammers to the wall and say, we know it's in here, we're going to try to pry this apart till we find it. They have to make their case before a judge. They have to get a warrant. And if they convince the judge, he'll say, hey, here's your warrant, have at it, let me know how it works out. These are some of the constraints on the legal authorities that are over us that they have to abide by. And this throws that all out the window. That's why it's so scary.
Well, I just think that big government is scary to begin with.
Yes, you're right.
And that's because, to set aside the particulars of this case, I mean, the fact is government is all about people, and you have good people and you have bad people, and then you have people who are good people that make bad mistakes. And so I think that government power should be limited for that reason alone.
Right.
The capacity for people to make mistakes is amplified exponentially simply because they have the power of the government backing them. So, yeah, I mean, I'm uncomfortable with all of this stuff. I'm struggling still, though, to figure out why they feel like the Statistics Canada in particular feels that they need this. Now, if CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, was trying to get this information, then there'd be a lot more red flags going up, because I could see a very real use by CRA for this information. I could get that, because they could be pursuing,
tax cheats and
not just tax cheats, but I want to know whether or not whether you could be perfectly honest in your tax returns. But if Revenue Canada wants to, it's almost like conducting an audit through the back door without actually informing people that you're doing an audit. Now, in fairness, most of the information that CRA would probably require if they were doing an audit of your finances and of your tax return, probably they would want a lot more than what they could get from these credit agencies. But
Fair
still,
enough. But according to Mike in the chat room, he says that CRA cannot get your financial information without a warrant.
right. So here's the question: if CRA can't get your financial information without a warrant, then they shouldn't be able to get it from not Revenue Canada, but Statistics Canada. Look, I don't. I know I'm sounding like I'm sitting on the fence here. I'm trying to get. Part of me is saying there's a problem here, but the part of me that's saying there's a problem, honestly, is having trouble putting its finger on what the problem is precisely. So, I mean, I can take a step back and I can sort of go to my default position, and my default position would be big government. There's no real justification here, therefore they shouldn't be able to do it. That's my default position. There's something going on here that doesn't add up, and I'm not sure. I just can't put my finger on it, so I'm uncomfortable with it. If I had to vote, if it was me saying, I have to approve of this or disapprove of it, I vote no. But there seems to be more to this story than meets the eye, particularly because I'm still struggling with the idea of what particularly can Statistics Canada obtain from a credit agency that they would find, or that the government would find useful or necessary in terms of statistics.
Well, remember something. This is just where it starts. It doesn't end here. There's 9 chartered banks they're going after, and that'll cover everything from ATM withdrawals to e-transfers. Everything you do financially will be available to StatsCan, including your credit scores. The credit scores is just where they started. They're not done by a long shot.
Right, and credit agencies, of course, they don't have access to or keep records of how many transactions you make in a bank.
No, that's
machine.
True.
Now, that's interesting marketing information, though. And if you could find a way to separate that information from the individual who's removing the money, you're using the ATM to access their bank account, that's interesting marketing information. So chartered banks or companies that provide ATM services, they want to know how many people are using ATMs in a particular geographical area.
Yeah, but they don't need to know who those people are.
I agree with you. I agree. I totally agree with you. Where I'm having trouble, once again, is I'm trying to figure out what exactly it is. How could Statistics Canada possibly use that information, unless Stats Canada sees itself as an information or a data gathering agency that is then able to make that data available to private contractors or private interests in order to make rational marketing decisions.
Even if they don't do it on purpose.
Now, they do that, by the way. They don't. Some data that Stats Canada gathers, they do make available to third parties for marketing, for whatever decision, research, etc. So third-party companies can do research using Statistics Canada data to determine marketing trends. But is that really a role for Statistics Canada to play? I don't know.
Okay, you can debate that, but even, like I said before, even if there is no nefarious intent here, and I don't know whether there is or not, there's still a lot of questions I have too. But given the how often cybersecurity has been breached around very sensitive information over the last several years, are you willing to trust your financial information in the hands of a massive government agency? Not me, because what I do with my money is nobody else's business. If they were to clean it first and take away the name and the address and the phone number and the all that personal identifying information, if they were to strip that off first and then have the agency send it, people would be a lot more comfortable with it. But because there have been so many, let's call it honest mistakes, and if you don't think they can make mistakes, I got 2 words for you. It's called Phoenix Pay. Okay? Tell me about disasters. So I am not interested in letting them have another opportunity for a massive breach that's going to affect that could potentially affect millions of Canadians. I just am not interested in letting them do that.
Now, Mike raises an interesting question in the chat room, and the question that he's raising is that, or the point he's making is that if this happens, then what stops the government from getting DNA information from a private DNA testing or agency?
Right.
Well, Mike, the fact is that you can already get that information. In fact, they use there's a case recently. I don't recall all of the particulars of it, but it was in the United States, and I believe it was in California, and a fellow sent his DNA into one of these genealogy testing for companies.
Ancestry.com or
Ancestry,
something like
that kind of thing. I don't know that it was Ancestry.com
but there's
specifically.
a bunch of companies like that.
And the police were able to get access to that data without a warrant, etc., and match it to DNA from a crime that had been committed 20 years before. And as a result, they caught a serial rapist and murderer. And so the point I'm making is that the authorities are already, somehow they already have access to that. And the argument, and this came up, we didn't have a chance to research this before the show, obviously, but I do recall the case, and I'm happy to find out a little more information about it for next week. But obviously the source of the DNA was an important factor that was argued during the trial. Okay? So at some point in time, a judge had to rule that the police were able to obtain that DNA, and it was perfectly legal. So I don't know what all of the details were around it, but certainly that information is not private. And if you want to have privacy in your life, the fact is that you have to stay away from these things. Stay away from Ancestry.com. Stay away from Google applications that want to know your location. Forget about all of these people that are upset about the Statistics Canada. Forget about all that stuff. They're not the real problem. The real problem rests with the cell phone that you're carrying around with you, and without that when you get your new cell phone and you're clicking through all this stuff, agree, yes, agree, yes, agree, permit, allow. Okay, you have no idea how much data that you're making available to not just to Google or whoever the provider is that you're using. And a lot of this is just statistical, and it's not being gathered for bad reasons.
The difference, though.
Well, hang on a second, okay? You're going to tell me, but it's not being gathered for nefarious reasons.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. We'll go ahead and finish your point.
But let me just say that you don't know. You don't know when that's going to be hacked. You don't know how, and we're hearing about this almost on if not a daily basis, certainly a weekly basis, where once again, 50 million records in this database, whether it's for, I think it was an Equifax recently had a data breach where the credit rate records of tens of millions of people were accessed and downloaded. So that's part of the downside to this whole modern connected world that we live in.
That's true, but the difference in the case of cell phones and social media and different platforms like that is every single one of them, although it would be hard to live without, are voluntary. Your financial records are personal and private, and the government is not giving you a chance to say yay or nay. They are simply taking it whether you like it or not. The banks are told they cannot tell you if they have sent your information off. It's the most. To me, there's a huge difference. It's like when somebody talks about being bullied on Facebook. My answer is get off Facebook. You don't have to be there, or Twitter or Instagram. You have a choice. But in this case, that choice does not exist. That option is not there for you, and that's the difference. And this is why this is so dark, and this is why the potential for abuse. Because I agree with you. Look, I understand that marketing. My wife and I had this conversation a couple of days ago. We're driving along, talking about putting winter tires back on the car. We have a set of winter tires and a set of summer tires, just like millions of other people do. And we said, it's getting close to be that time of year. We should. When I got within 10 minutes on my phone was a pop-up ad for winter tires. My phone was listening and created an ad specifically for me because she and I have been talking about putting new tires in the car. We are mined for information every day. I understand that. But if I don't want to participate in that, I can chuck the cell phone out the window. I don't have to. It would make my life a lot more difficult.
But you've already, the point I'd make here is that you've already, for that to happen, you already had to give your consent.
Fair enough. But I can revoke that consent. In this case, we don't have that option. And that's what's wrong. If they said allowed, and most people wouldn't do this. I don't think most people would. But for the sake of discussion, if the institution or the government said, "Do you mind if we used your information as a source for statistical analysis on how Canadians in your demographic spend their money, and what your shopping habits are, what your spending habits are, savings, and that kind of stuff?" At least then you could say yay or nay. Some people would say yes. Some people would say no. But we're not given that. This is supposed to be a free country. So that's the big, when I boil it all down, and the more I think about this is the part that really bothers me, is that we are not given an option. And they have words for countries where you don't have options. We're not there yet, but every step we take down that road brings us closer.
Oh, I thought you were going to say liberal Canada.
Yeah, well, okay, that's yeah. We've been there for a while, but the word I was thinking of was dictatorship, of course. And Canada's not a dictatorship, and I don't mean to denigrate the word, because real dictatorships are horrible places, and Canada's a long way from that. But why even start down that road in the first place? Why would Canadians allow themselves to be manipulated that way?
But this is I don't. Again, I'm not defending it. Don't get me wrong. It's a big deal, but it's not as big a deal as all of the things that have come before. And I think the part of the problem here is that, if you're up in arms about this, then why aren't you up in arms about so many of the other things in terms of the way the government is controlling us?
That's a good question. Here's the answer. Who cares why? If this is what it takes to get your attention to how poorly the government is handling national affairs, then I don't care if it's this issue or some other issue. At least people are now becoming engaged, and they're understanding how poorly run the country is, and that they need to get rid of this present government. If that's what it takes, okay, because you're right, there's been dozens of issues come along before then, okay, that people should have gotten upset about. But once the house is on fire, what started the fire doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the house is on fire. They've been upset about the carbon tax. That's part of it. But nothing like this. This is an explosive issue.
So what's the solution, Nick?
Well, the solution is
give it to me in 60 seconds.
What
do we do about it?
We go to our banks. If we have money in those 9 large banks, we withdraw it and put it in smaller banks, credit unions.
But why wouldn't the government be able to access that information from credit unions?
They haven't cast the net that far
yet.
But the point is, what you do then is you terrify the heads of those 9 banks, who could then either take the government to court or at least tell the government, we're not doing this. And that, because believe it or not, even the government listens to the banks.
Yeah, I don't know.
What else is there?
Well, that's my question.
Either that, or you could. This is like saying if we all flushed our toilets at exactly the same time, we'd overflow the sewer system, okay? But we could, for this next year or so, file our income taxes, but don't pay them. Because you've got about 5 or 7 years before you actually have to pay them.
Well, yeah. Okay, don't take that advice, guys.
I'm just saying, you could.
Do what you want to do, but don't say that you did it because Nick or Joe said to do it.
That's right.
Okay, because that might be problematic.
I'm just saying that there are alternatives out there. I think the more reasonable course of action is just to move your money out of the big 9 banks. If you've got an account at the Royal or CIBC or Bank of Montreal or whatever the big 9 are, move them off to smaller credit companies like co-ops, Desjardins, Northern Credit. Take your pick. There's dozens of them out there. And that will scare the living crap out of not only the government, but the big banks too.
Okay, we're going for a break. We'll see you back here in a couple of minutes, guys. Okay, we're back in the combat zone, or I should say you're back in the combat zone with us. I'm Joe, he's Nick.
And we are combative.
And we are combative, yes, and we're broadcasting to you tonight from Bunker B. We're not going to disclose the location of Bunker B, except to say that it's somewhere around Canada's nation's capital. And boy, oh, by the way, we were just looking at each other because I think that's the first time we actually listened to the lyrics of that song on the break. So, if you're listening to this live, you were just listening to a song called The Revolt by a group called Neil Cross.
I didn't pick it. I didn't pick it.
And I picked it because it sounded good, because I like a little bit of upbeat tempo music, a little bit of rock, and maybe even a little heavy metal. I confess that, sometimes at night when I'm reading in my little Kindle, my tablet. Well, it's not a Kindle tablet; it's a Samsung tablet, and so I'll be reading on it, and then I'll think, oh, I think I can get YouTube on this. So if I have, I plug in my earphones, and what's the next thing I'm doing? Before I know it, I'm listening to Ted Nugent.
Are you going to go see the Queen movie?
Yeah, you keep saying that, but I was never a Queen fan.
Freddie Mercury, man.
I was never a Freddie Mercury fan.
The greatest front man in history.
No, Ted Nugent.
No, I like Ted. Don't get me wrong.
Uncle Ted?
Uncle Ted. I like his attitude. I like his Second Amendment stand. Okay, but I was just never a Nugent fan.
And ladies and gentlemen, Mark is in the chat room.
Oh my Lord, that was welcome, Mark. Nice to see you.
It's been a long time, Mark.
Yeah, where you been? Man? We missed you, buddy.
Yeah, we did.
Anyway.
Okay, serious stuff.
Okay, let's get back to this week we had the tragedy in Pittsburgh where some lunatic...
Crime.
Tragedy, crime.
Let's not call it a tragedy. Let's call it what it was. It was a heinous crime.
Oh, it was all
I
of
hate
that.
it when these guys use the word... By the way, I'm not criticizing you personally, but everybody calls this stuff a tragedy. The tragedy that... it's not a tragedy. It's a crime.
Okay.
A tragedy is when
the barbarous, heinous crime.
Yeah, well, tragedy is when you're in Indonesia and you're crossing some channel or whatever, and the
mountain falls on you.
Well, no, the ship, the ferry capsizes.
Okay,
that's a tragedy, and it's a funny thing because that's a tragedy they try to turn into a crime, but this is not a tragedy. This was a crime.
Okay, so in Pittsburgh this week we had the heinous, barbarous crime of a lunatic walking into, and even I shouldn't even call him a lunatic. He's just a monster who walked in and shot 11 people in a synagogue in the midst of their prayer service. And I'm going to because Joseph, you're pretty tight in, you're in the Jewish community. The one question I will not ask you is, how do you think people feel? That I heard that 100 times. I think it's the dumbest question on the planet. Because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that these people are devastated by this, and you don't need to ask them about it. There's more important questions to ask.
Yeah, I'm not. You know what? I'm gonna sound is going to sound like I'm almost to a certain degree belittling it. I don't intend to, and I don't want anybody to interpret it that way. So again, take a pill, people. Don't write in. Don't send your emails. Okay, no hate mail, no threats. Okay, but what I'm going to say is 11 people killed in a synagogue, shot in a synagogue, terrible crime. 23 children shot in a school, terrible crime.
Right.
This is not, let's not pretend that this is different from any of those other circumstances any of those other
So what you're trying
acts.
to say, this isn't a Jewish crime, this is a crime against people.
Right.
Okay.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because it is. Whether you're Jewish or whether you're Christian or whether you're, black, white, green, or yellow, it doesn't matter. You're all people.
And I'm not going to, people have asked me what I think about this in terms of anti-Semitism and stuff like that. And my understanding is that this is was the most, the greatest act of anti-Semitic violence ever committed in the United States, in the history of the United States. And given the magnitude of anti-Semitic violent acts that have occurred over the years, that says a lot about the decency and law-abiding nature of Americans. So let's keep some perspective. I think it's worth making that note. The United States is, I think, a great country. It's not a perfect country. Canada's not a perfect country. There are bad people in the United States. There are bad people in Canada. But I just want to say that I don't see this as being an indication of how bad things are in the United States. Now, having said that, we live in a violent world, and if this is violence coming to the United States, well, my American friends, many of my American friends, I find, with all due respect, are a little provincial. They're a little isolated in terms of their understanding of how the world is outside of their borders, and it's natural. It's nothing to be surprised about or ashamed about, but that is the reality. So what you saw this weekend in Pittsburgh, and what you're seeing with some of these school massacres, is not an entirely new thing. It may be relatively new to Americans, and as a consequence of that, they may think that the world is coming apart at its seams. But the reality is that these kinds of things have been going on around the world, and if not school children, certainly Jews. Okay, not so much lately as much as it's been in the past 50 years or so, and well, we're not even going to get into the World War II years and pre-World War II years. But certainly there's been a lot of this kind of wanton violence against Jews in the Middle East and in Europe as well in recent decades.
Now,
not in the United States, though. See, the United States has been a pretty relatively safe country with respect to these things. But now this kind of violence, you're seeing it more and more in the United States. So the question that I think that you have to ask yourself now, get off the hateful rhetoric of the Republicans and Donald Trump and the hateful rhetoric that's going on with the Democratic Party. And I'm going to tell you, as somebody with no dog, I don't have a dog in the race, as you know. I'm not one of these people that thinks that Donald Trump is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But what I
he is the greatest thing since Obama.
Well, okay, yeah. Chronologically speaking, there are a lot of things I like about Donald Trump and what he stands for and what he's been doing. But Nick, you know very well, and people who've been listening to this show know very well that I don't particularly care for many things about Donald Trump and the way he conducts himself.
Yeah, fair enough.
But and I'm speaking here objectively. I'm not speaking as a defender of Donald Trump. That's why I wanted to sort of lay that out. I don't think that there's any question for a truly unbiased observer to listen to what's coming out of the political circles and leadership in the United States. You cannot, if you're not biased, if you're truly neutral, you cannot possibly maintain the fiction that Donald Trump and the Republicans are the main purveyors of radicalism, violent language, mob mentality. I'm not going to say that they don't contribute to that, because they do. But the main body of that kind of rhetoric really is coming from the left. It's coming largely from leaders of the Democratic Party and the Democratic movement in the United States. Be that as it may, as much as that is unpleasant and as much as all of that rhetoric from all sides should stop, I don't think that's the issue. Because I don't think it's fair to try to find the cause and say, I figured out what the reason is why people do these kinds of things. Okay? I just don't think that, I think that's a waste of time. Maybe, it's somebody who's an expert in psychology and psychiatry will come up with the right answer. I don't know. There are many theories around that, including he was motivated because, he heard Donald Trump say something or whatever. I think that's just a stupid explanation, quite frankly. But the real issue is, what are you going to do in response to this?
Yeah.
And yes, turn down the rhetoric, because I just think that's the decent thing to do. But I think you're fooling yourself if you think that by turning down the rhetoric that you're going to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. I mean, let's face facts, okay? This guy comes in, he shoots 11 Jews at prayer. Or somebody goes into a black church and shoots a bunch of African-American Southern Baptists,
yeah.
Okay? It happens. All right. Maybe you can make the connection between rhetoric and those kinds of things. But you can't make that connection when it comes to going into a school and shooting 23 innocent young children. Or I just pulled that number out of my
yeah.
my,
Well, you're thinking
air,
of cases like Sandy Hook and examples like that.
Things like that.
Right.
Okay. Or somebody going into a crowded movie theater and shooting 11 or 12 or 13 people to death there. I don't think that's a rhetoric thing. That's just bad people or crazy people.
Doing bad
things.
things.
Here's the other thing, Nick. I want to get this off my chest too. Banning guns is not going to answer that. Is not an answer to that question. It really isn't, because guns exist. Making them illegal is not going to make them go away. And bad people who want to do things with guns are going to find guns to do bad things. Here in Canada, in the city of Toronto, we've had a lot over the last couple of years of gun violence. Most of the gun violence is committed by people who have illegal weapons.
And belong to illegal gangs.
They're already breaking the law, getting these weapons, let alone using them.
Right.
So would it have an effect? I think that it's an interesting question. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. I think you can make a case that it would. But the fact is that there are always going to be bad people out there, and there are always going to be, for want of a better way of describing them, crazy people out there. So here I'm coming to the crux of my argument, okay? You have to stop trying to focus your attention on eliminating the problem, because you cannot eliminate the problem. You have to find a way to protect the people who deserve protection. That's where the focus has to be. You know, we talked about this in a different context recently about homelessness, about poverty.
Right.
Stop trying to eliminate poverty and find ways to help people who are poor. And that should be the focus. Forget about trying to eliminate it. You're not going to eliminate poverty. You're not going to eliminate helplessness or homelessness. You're not going to eliminate hunger. Help people who are hungry. Help people who are poor. Help people who are homeless. And stop with this mega project idea, utopian idea that we're going to eliminate these things. When it comes to gun violence, it's the same thing. Guns are out there, legal or not. Whether you have permits or not, none of that's going to make a difference. There are going to be guns out there, and there are going to be people that are going to use those guns. So you have to focus your attention on protecting people, and here it is. I don't know whether the answer is, I mean, for sure, if you don't want people to shoot people in synagogues or in churches, have some kind of restricted access to the property and have armed guards. And that will stop it dead cold 100%. Now, if you don't want to do that in your synagogue or your church or your mosque or your temple or your
whatever it is,
or whatever it is, that's your decision. That's great, okay? But don't say this is America or this is Canada. It would be so bad for us to do this kind of stuff. And I'm going to now that's in your house of worship. Now I'm even going to go one step further. I don't think there should be a choice. I think that when it comes to schools, sure, have choices with houses of worship. But when it comes to schools, I don't think there should be a choice. I think there's ample evidence now. There have been so many of these children that have been killed in these kinds of shootings, and it's not just in the United States. Okay, it's happened in different countries, and it happened in many cases in Israel. Acts of terrorism targeted towards children in schools. And the answer to eliminating that is you're not going to get rid of terrorism. You're not going to get rid of bad people. You're not going to get rid of guns. But what you can do is you can defend those children. So you put up a proper fence around that school. And by a proper fence, I don't mean a little chain link fence. I mean, proper wrought iron or other, whatever it is.
Something really uncomfortable to get over.
So that, and you have a single access point, and the kids go in there and out of there, and maybe you even have metal detectors. I don't object to metal detectors going in and out of schools, but you have a guard, an armed guard, that's at that access point. And you will stop that kind of attack from happening. If you were to do it in a synagogue, you'd stop it in a synagogue. And if you do it in schools, you'll stop it in schools. And that's what I'm saying is that's what we should be doing in our schools now.
Let me play devil's advocate for just a minute.
That was a little bit of a rant.
Yeah, but it was a good one. So you want to, let's say you're right, and I agree. I tend to agree with you. I think that's one of the best ways of protecting people is to give them the ability to protect themselves. And if that's an armed guard standing there with a semi-automatic weapon, so that should somebody try something stupid, or evil, there is an automatic lethal response. You've seen cases, especially in the States, where law-abiding citizens have used their own firearms to either take out the bad guy after the fact or stop him before he gets a chance. Okay, so you and I are on the same page, but let's carry this one step further. Are you willing to do that at bus stops? Bus stops as in Greyhound bus stops? Bus terminals is a better word. Are you willing to do it at VIA stations? Are you willing to do it at sporting events, the gatherings on Parliament Hill? I guess what I'm saying is, how far are you willing to carry that? Because if you take away, and again, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, if you take away opportunities like churches and schools and different houses of worship for these kinds of things to happen, what's to say that they just don't shift targets and find a different place to enact their whatever is wrong with them, take out their rage, if you want, against society in a mass shooting of another kind, like we saw down in Vegas?
Okay, well, the answer to that is yes. I am willing to do that. Okay, look, I'm not. I don't know. I'm of two minds. I don't. I'm stumbling along here because I'm trying to formulate my thoughts, and I want to make sure that I'm coming across reasonably and rationally here. I don't really know where I am in terms of just simply allowing people to carry guns, just generally speaking, concealed guns. I don't know. I see both sides of that argument, okay?
Right.
And I know I've heard a lot of people say, well, let teachers carry guns in schools, and, if a teacher wants to carry a gun, fine. If he doesn't, that's fine too. But at least if that teacher had a gun, if there was a teacher that had a gun in that school, he or she would be able to shoot the perpetrator. True. That's absolutely true. But it just seems to me to be a much simpler, cleaner solution to say, let's
let them into the school in the first place?
Yeah, just have an armed guard. And it's not unprecedented. And, Mike in the chat room asked a question, well, aren't they doing that in New York City already? In New York, I don't think they have any armed guards, but they certainly, in many schools, and certainly in the Jewish schools in New York, they have controlled access and they have guards. And I don't know whether they're armed or not, but if they were, it wouldn't surprise me entirely. And I'll tell you, you go to Israel, if there's a mood of terrorism, for want of a better way of expressing it, there's an elevated threat level.
Right.
Not unusual to have armed guards stopping you before you go into a hotel. And it's quite common in Israel, even during periods when there is no elevated terror threat, to have armed guards at bus terminals or at shopping centers. You want to go into the shopping center? I can't go at a normal day. I can't walk into a shopping center in Israel, okay, just without having to pass through usually a metal detector and certainly guards, and usually having to open my bag if I'm carrying a bag to show that I'm not carrying any weapons or explosive devices in them. So it's not, and it's a free society and it's a healthy society and everybody has fun and nobody's traumatized by it. So what I'm saying is, for me, while I don't want to shift blame or anything like that, I don't want to give anybody the impression that when a bad person goes into a school and shoots little children, that it's not their fault. It's the fault of the government because they didn't take the steps. But having said that, Nick, I don't know how the population, I don't know how the people of the United States, if they're really concerned about the safety of their children, I don't understand how they don't just take this measure. Every school's got janitors, guidance counselors, nurses, teachers, principals, you name it, okay?
So what you're saying
have an armed
is
guard.
The cost of adding an armed guard is, compared to the running of the whole school,
right,
a small price to pay.
Right.
Okay.
To protect the lives of our children, absolutely.
Okay, so let me just ask you this one question as we go towards the break. Do you think the resistance to this, and I'm setting politics aside and, the different factions who would fight this over on political grounds, just from a reasonable, logical, what's best for the kids kind of mentality, do you think that resistance to these ideas that you're putting out there comes from the fact that for such a long time we have lived in relative peace in North America, that we don't have the cult like in Israel, and I'm using that as probably the best example, or best only in the sense it's the most obvious example. You have a culture where every day since the inception of that country there's been a threat, and they've learned to build that into their lifestyle. In Canada, in the United States, that's almost until recently, let's say 2001, that's never been the case. The last time we had any kind of shoot 'em up was back in 1812. We beat the Americans so bad they've never been back. We've had crime and so on, but we've never had this open warfare against our citizens. So is it part of that we don't have it ingrained in our culture?
Well, first of all, I take issue with your characterization of the situation as open warfare against our citizens. I don't think it's that bad. I think that you have a perception that it's that bad because, first of all, we're inundated with news all the time.
That's true.
All the time. So we hear of every little thing, and it's in our face.
So it's the problem you're saying is magnified.
I think so. I think that the problem is worse than it's been in the past. But I don't have any statistics to demonstrate that. But even if it's worse than it has been in the past, I think it's wrong to think that to use the kind of language that you used in terms of being at war with ourselves. I just don't think it's that bad, unless of course you're in certain neighborhoods in Chicago, in which case, watch out. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Then it's very true.
But no, I don't. To answer your question directly, I actually think that the resistance to this is politically motivated. And it's dogmatic. I think that it's a very simple solution. Nobody suggests that police should not have guns because we don't want to have a gun society. You have tens of thousands of police officers in the United States, if not more, carrying guns, okay? And there's a reason why they carry guns. They carry guns to protect and defend innocent citizens. Well, then why wouldn't we have the same thing, a police officer or an armed guard protecting our children in an environment where, unfortunately, there are people out there that are going to commit acts of violence. And by the way, we were talking about guns. If there were no guns on the street, trust me, the bad people are going to do bad things. They'll find a way to do it.
Look at the case of the soldier in Britain who was decapitated with a butcher knife.
Sure.
The guy didn't have a gun. He used a blunt or a sharp knife.
Prior to 9/11, the single greatest act of terrorism committed on American soil was committed by Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma City. And
That's
I
right.
don't recall how many people he killed with a bomb, but I think it was over 200 people.
Yeah, he tore the building in half.
Okay. And the weapon of choice in recent years or recent decades in Israel for terrorists has not been guns. It was bombs, suicide bombing, walking onto a bus with or walking into a pizza shop and killing people that way. Murdering 20 people and maiming 50 or 100 people. And once the Israelis licked that problem, more or less, now the weapon of choice is knives. Okay, what are you going to do? You're going to ban knives? Well, okay, if you're going to ban knives, then you might as well ban screwdrivers. So the fact is that the bad people will find a way to do bad things, and if they can't do it with guns, they'll find another way to do it.
Yeah, it's not the weapon that's the problem.
So get off of the gun thing one way or the other. Stop whining and complaining about how we're going to create a gun society. Look, you arm your police officers. Why wouldn't you arm guards? And if you're caught up in the semantics of it, for pity's sake, hire police officers.
We have armed guards who work for companies like Brinks and other security firms that transfer money from one bank to another or from one financial institution for another, and they're armed.
Sure.
To guard money.
Sure.
We don't have armed guards to guard our children.
It's a crime, and again, without mitigating or reducing or detracting, taking away any of the guilt of the people who perpetrate these kinds of crimes against our children, because they're absolutely 100% guilty and answerable for what they've done. But at the same time, I don't want to say that let's call it a different kind of responsibility on the part of society and politicians who are obstructing having proper protection for our children. I don't get it. And I think it's all dogmatic and political, and I think it's shameful that we would allow our children to continue to be exposed to the bad acts of bad people simply because we want to play the semantic game with this idea of we don't want to have a person. We don't mind police running up and down the street with guns or in their cars with guns going around. But God forbid that we should have one of those police officers, if you want to have somebody highly trained and properly paid, sitting in front of the school making sure that nobody does this kind of thing.
All right, with that, we're going to take a break. It's time for our top of the hour break. We'll be back on the other side with more here on the Combat Zone. I'm Nick. He's Joseph. We'll be right back after this. Okay, welcome back to Hour 2 of the Combat Zone. I'm Nick, he's Joseph, and we are just having quite the conversation this evening. It's a little bit heavier tonight, but there's a lot on the plate, a lot of things to discuss. So I want to dive back in to one of the topics, and this one is just a quick one I'll talk about. I heard this on the radio today, and I was just floored. I can't believe the sense of entitlement that comes with this mindset. Adrian Clarkson hasn't been our Governor's General since 2005. I think that, if my memory serves me correctly, based on what I heard today, that's when she left office.
I don't remember, but
anyway,
Governor General Adrian Clarkson.
2005? No, it was 2010 because it's been about a decade since. In that time, she has billed the Canadian taxpayer for expenses for $1 million, $100,000 a year for someone who is not the Governor's General anymore. Now, make no mistake, if you're Governor's General, first of all, you've got...
Governor General.
I thought it was Governors, plural.
Well, yeah, but
Isn't that the official title name? Governor's General?
No, more than one Governor's General, but if you're talking about one person, it's Governor General.
Okay, the GG.
The GG, the Governor General. You got it.
All right.
And here endeth the lesson for the day.
That is your lesson in English. I always thought it was Governor's General.
And for all of you guys out there, it's not all of a sudden. It's all of the sudden. Okay, got that? All of the sudden. And if you can't say all of the sudden, then please say suddenly. But it is not all of a sudden. I see that all over the place now. Another one.
That's why I have him on the show.
I could have done it, not I could have done it.
Could have, yeah, that I knew.
Okay, and we're contemplating starting a grammar show for all of you people out there, for all of you college
for all
graduates
4 people
with PhDs.
Of the 36 million Canadians.
You know, Nick, I got to tell you, we'll get back to Adrian Clarkson in a second. I think it's a serious issue, but I have to tell you, when I was working at a think tank, and we would commission papers from people who were masters and PhD, not PhD candidates, PhD graduates. Okay,
right.
And we'd get papers and research and drafts and stuff like that. And I mean, oh my goodness gracious, the atrocious spelling and language. I mean, some of these guys couldn't put 2 or 3 sentences together. And most of the time I'd spend editing was not putting the paper together in a presentable way we wanted to put it, with the proper branding and things like that, but just basic going through and doing spelling and it's could have, not could of. When they say could have, it's
a
could,
contraction.
Could, COULG apostrophe
VE.
VE.
Yeah, well, it's have is the contraction.
Well, exactly. But the number of people out there that we've spent tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars educating that didn't get that.
Look at doctors. Ask yourself, how does a guy spend, 10, 12 years becoming a doctor, depending on the specialty, and can't fill out a prescription that anybody else but a trained pharmacist can read? I mean,
now, see, that's not fair because for me, it's not fair. It would be very unfair for me to comment on that because I'm one of those people that takes notes and I'll write notes, and then the next day I'll be reading my notes and I can't read them because I go, what did I write? I can't even read my own writing.
The difference is you didn't spend 12 years in medical school, where you would think one of the things is accurate communication between what you want done and what gets done.
I suppose.
Anyway, that's besides the point.
Back to our Governor General.
Yes, the Governor General.
Or ex-Governor General, former
Right.
Governor General. Adrian
So
Clarkson.
people who
This
hold-
is a problem not just for Adrian. This is a general problem, no pun intended.
Yes, you're right, and you're quite right. Now, Adrian Clarkson turned out to be a pretty good Governor General from the point of view of the way she treated the military. She was spent a lot of time with the troops, took her job as Governor General seriously in that regard. So I have a certain amount of respect for her, even though I didn't like the selection process. I didn't think she was the right person. She was appointed by Paul Martin, I believe. And he just was watching a show one night. She was on CBC, the Communist Broadcasting Corporation. I mean, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. She had her own show. I forget what it was called now. But anyway, he went, "Oh, her. That's who I want." And that was the next Governor General. So, but overall, she was paid, after retirement, she got a pension of $147,000 a year.
This is a pension from the CBC.
No, this is from us.
Of course.
Yeah, CBC, okay, I get it.
CBC, it was us.
But as a Governor General, she received a pension.
Okay, but wasn't she getting a pension from the CBC?
Well, that's where I'm going. So she's got the GG pension. She's got the CBC pension. She is awarded up to $4 million to start a charitable foundation in her name as a reward for being the Governor's General. So she's well compensated. I know what you're laughing at. I realize that it's habit, okay? I said Governor's General. Anyway, so what bothers me is this sense of, if I hold a job and there's perks and benefits that come with that job, in the private sector, in the real world, when you are terminated, fired, let go, quit, leave, whatever, those perks and benefits end, or at least will expire over a given time. You don't get to keep billing your former employer for expenses because she lives a pretty lavish lifestyle. And she's one of these people, as I heard a commentator say today on the air, that she has always found a way to live on the public dime and has never known. And I don't. When I say an honest day's work, I'm not saying she doesn't know what it is to work hard, meet deadlines, that kind of thing. But she's never earned a dime on her own merit in the private sector. And when you see that, and you think about how many people will never earn anywhere near that kind of money, never mind bill $100,000 in expenses a year, it's an outrage and it's a slap in the face to the taxpayer. This is your cue.
Okay, so I don't know that she's never earned anything in the private sector outside of the government. I mean, maybe she hasn't.
If she has, it's been a long time ago.
I get that. Okay, hey, and nope, guys, no popcorn when you're on the air. Come on, guys. This is a professional operation. Anyway, look, I'm not going to defend her. I think you're right. It's one thing if you are, the king or the queen or the whatever. It's another thing if you are just the Queen's representative in Canada. You do the job, you finish the job, that's it, finished, over and done with. A charitable foundation, it's an interesting idea, maybe, but
you can even debate that. But
look, I was really surprised when I saw this story, because I had no idea that once your tenure as Governor General is over, that you get to still charge things to the government, to the taxpayer. I'm interested in knowing what kinds of things that she was charging, though. I mean, was she continuing to do duties that would be, let's just say,
public service duties?
Well, yeah, that would be sort of peripherally related to her role as Governor General, even though she's no longer the Governor General.
Well, maybe. Like, you might be able to say, okay, she should have a small office because she was Governor General and people want to hear what she has to say, so they might engage her in speaking events and things like that. But she could very easily charge a fee for that and not have to charge the
Oh, yeah, I don't want to see... I wouldn't want to see her charging a fee for that.
If
she's a former Governor General, she should go. She shouldn't be charging a fee. She shouldn't be being paid for that. Well, maybe, I don't know.
If she does it privately,
yeah.
Like if let's say that the Kiwanis Club of Tuktoyaktuk wants her to come up and give a speech, and she says, "Okay, I'll come, but you're going to pay me $15,000." Okay,
right.
That I don't have any problem with, because she's peddling might be too harsh a word, but she's marketing what she has to offer in the private sector, and somebody's willing to pay her for it.
Right.
No problem.
And by the way, if you are with the Kiwanis Club of Tuktoyaktuk and you're looking for a cheap speaker,
we'll come.
Yeah, we'll both come up, and we'll pay us $1,000 plus expenses, and we'll split the $1,000 between us.
Heck, we do that in Churchill, Manitoba.
I want to
too.
know how come I haven't been appointed to the Senate yet. That's what I want to know.
The line starts right behind me, buddy. Because then we could really charge some fees. Okay. But the whole point...
I want to do a show trying to find out why Stephen Harper did not appoint senators to the Senate. I think we could have some fun. I know a few people we could get on the show to talk about that. Okay, we're digressing, but I couldn't help that.
No, okay. So let's move on. I think that's really all that needs to be said about that.
So seriously, this is a serious question now. So former governors general get to continue to charge taxpayers. Is there a time limit? Does this end?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
So I would be interested, and if anyone knows the answer to this, by the way, our number to call is, our toll-free line is 844-415-2115, or you can put the answer in the chat room. If anyone's out there wants to research it and let everybody know, what exactly is the kind of thing that could be charged to taxpayers by former governors general, and is there a time limit on this? How long does this last? And here's another question: do they get a pension?
Yeah, they do. Much I do know.
Is Adrian Clarkson getting a pension from
$147,000 a year
as the former governor general?
As the former governor's general.
Does she still qualify for a pension from the CBC at the same time, or is that double dipping?
I can't see why.
Because it's all coming from the taxpayer.
Yeah, look, I don't think. I think the day she was let go from CBC to take over the job from Governor's General. Now, if she has a pension from them and she's paid into a pension plan, she's entitled to it. Okay, but when you become Governor's General, the day you are escorted out the last time, that your perks end beyond that. You're not allowed to. So if it's double dipping, okay. Even that. So let's say it was she's making $200,000 a year, between the two pensions, or $250,000 between the two pensions. It's outrageous, but it's a lot better than being able to build taxpayers in perpetuity for $100,000 a year. Right. But was it Bev Oda that got canned over a $6 glass of orange juice?
Yeah. Okay. Well, now you're baiting me. Okay. She resigned. There was a public outcry over it, but here's the reality. Okay. If you're in an average hotel in the city of London and you have a glass of orange juice, you're going to pay $10, $11 for it, because that's the cost of orange juice. Okay? If I'm staying at a 4-star hotel in London, private or as a private citizen or not a private citizen, that's what I'm going to pay for it, because that's the cost of orange juice at a hotel in London. So it's not highfalutin, high fancy, high class stuff. Now, if you want the minister to send out either herself or to send out her staff to go and get a bottle of orange juice in the local corner store to bring it back to the breakfast table at the hotel, I have bad news. They won't let you bring it in and serve it there. So, I mean, I thought that was just ridiculous, outrageous. It was really.
That's all true, but the outrage over a $6 or $10 glass of orange juice was far out of proportion to the sin committed. This case, we don't hear a peep until now, 10 years later, 12 years later, that she's been, never mind $6 or $10 for orange juice, $100,000 a year.
Now, I have a better question, or a better illustration of outrageous. Not the Bev Oda orange juice. I think she got a bum deal on that, rap on that. But now, who was it in the Maritimes in Atlantic Canada? I can't remember. He was a Liberal cabinet minister, I think, and he had submitted expense claims for coffee at Tim Hortons and a pack of bubble gum. If my recollection is correct, and he got called before a House committee in Ottawa, and they were asking him about it, and his response was, "I'm entitled to my entitlements."
David Dingwall.
David Dingwall, that was it.
Yeah, the Dingwall effect.
That's it.
That's how come I remember it. David Dingwall. And the David Dingwall syndrome is I'm entitled to my entitlements.
Yes.
You know what's tragic? We've set it up so he's right.
Yeah, but you have to have some judgment, okay? So this is what I'm saying is before I pass judgment to the degree that I'm qualified to pass judgment on Adrienne Clarkson, I want to know, clearly she's in law, she's allowed, the system is set up that she's allowed to make some submissions for expenses. I just want to know what those expenses are for. And I'm not even talking about whether it's coffee or bubble gum or a muffin at Tim Hortons, okay? I'm just asking, just in general, is it for travel? Is it for, what exactly are you doing that you're entitled to charge the cost of that expense back to taxpayers and have them reimburse you for it? This was total news to me. Maybe, I'm fairly informed about how all this stuff works in government, as you know, Nick, but this was a total new thing to me. I didn't know this, never occurred to me that it was an issue. So again, I'm interested in knowing what the issue here is. What are they allowed to charge? Why are they allowed to charge it? And for how long are they allowed to charge it?
Well, I'm just doing a little math here, real fast. That breaks down to, that's what I thought, $8,300 a month. That's her expenses. So divide that by 4.
I'm not going to go. I know, but excessive, right? The reality is this, okay? If you're allowed, triple what she's allowed to charge, and she'll charge it.
Yeah,
that's just the nature of the beast. If you're allowed to do it, you'll do it. So it's an exceptional person that will go, well, I could charge that, but I'm not going to, because why not save taxpayers' money?
Well, again, it goes back to the idea of public service versus public service. And they've forgotten that.
That's witty. I hadn't thought of that. That's a new one, Nick.
Well, I've used it before, but it's public service, not public service. And that's what is infected a lot of people like that, is they've forgotten that they're no better than the guy, who's out on the street down there on Albert and Sparks Street, begging for change. The only difference is they wear better clothes and live in a better house. That's not what makes a person valuable. So I just have a real problem with this kind of thing, especially when I know how hard it is, how hard it is for people to get by these days, and especially with things like carbon tax coming down the road and all the different things that are going to make life even more expensive that these people are never going to have to suffer through.
I know. The Trudeau carbon tax, I totally agree. And let's be perfectly fair. The Trudeau carbon tax or the sheer carbon regulation,
Yes,
It's
you're
all
right.
the same to me.
Well, you know what? We talked about that at length last week, and you're quite right.
I'm not giving the Conservatives a pass on this.
I don't think anybody
Carbon dioxide is not... Okay, wake up, guys. Listen.
should. Yeah.
Wake up. Carbon dioxide is not pollution.
That's right.
Number one.
It's plant food.
No, it's plant food or not, it's not pollution. Okay, number one. And number two, I don't care if it's a tax or it's regulation. It's still going to increase the cost. Both of them are going to increase the cost to consumers. So my advice to Canadians is don't be bamboozled or hoodwinked. They're both equally bad positions to take. And if you're a Liberal supporter, you should be on the phone to the Prime Minister's office saying this is bad. And if you're a Conservative member, a member of the Conservative Party, you should be on the phone to Andrew Scheer's office, the leader of the Conservative Party, and say, are you crazy? This is bad. We don't want more regulation. Knock it off. Okay, sorry, I had to say that. I'm not letting you guys get away with that.
And I don't blame you because I agree with you. I mean, what difference does it make what form the tax takes? Because increasing regulation is just another form of taxation. Because what do you have to do? You have to pay fees. There's hire people, administer all this stuff. And Marin makes a good point. He said, if you want to hear some really sad stories, join the Facebook group Federal Public Service Phoenix Pay System. I mean, they can't even pay their own people. Regularly and on time. How are they going to manage something as wide-ranging as a carbon tax, whether it's Scheer or whether it's Trudeau? If you're going to have regulation do it, you're just asking for trouble. If you're going to try to impose it and then give more back than you took in to 90% of the Canadians out there, then you're lying to them because no government ever gives you more than they take. They just don't do it. It's a physical impossibility because government is so large and consumes so much money just running itself. That money has to come from somewhere, and it's out of our pockets. Anyhow, there was a couple other topics I wanted to get to tonight, and I got to put my eyeballs on so I can see. Okay, there's a phrase in the news right now that's kind of in vogue, and it's populism. And whenever you hear that phrase, it's usually from some left-wing organization, CNN, CBC, you pick the outlet. When they use the term populism, they're talking about some government that, in some definition of the word, is leaning towards the right. They're rejecting the globalist agenda. They're rejecting this idea that we're all one big happy, the Hillary Clinton idea that it takes a village and the whole world is just one big village and we all should just hug and kiss and get along. And people are rejecting that, and that rejection is growing in leaps and bounds. The latest example is out of Brazil, where they just... Now, when I say a hardline right-winger, that depends on how you define several terms. One is hard right or hard, and the other one is right-winger. But in Brazil, they just elected a right-leaning, let's call it a right-leaning government. But that's not alone. You also have countries like the United States, Austria, the Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary have all done the same thing. Now, I posted an article on our Facebook page for the show that talks about governments that are leaning right if they haven't actually gone out. In other words, within the country, there are parties who are rising in popularity who want to close their borders to uncontrolled immigration. They want to reestablish their borders within the European Union. And these countries are places that might surprise you. Sweden, Denmark, Holland, France, Italy, Switzerland, all these different places are moving to the right, even if you take it from a European idea of what moving to the right means, because it's different than, I'm not saying they're hardcore SOCONs like we find in North America, but any step to the right, from our perspective, is a good step. And they just had enough. I think that when you hear the pundits talk about they're rejecting globalism, and they use the term populism as a negative, as a pejorative. I think what they're really saying is that nationalism or pride in your country, as I understand it, is a good thing. and that the largest organization a person can belong to that you can hold accountable is the nation state. Because if you get bigger than that, your voice gets watered down, your vote gets watered down to the point where it's insignificant. Imagine if we were all let the UN run the whole world, and they said, okay, we're going to have a vote on whether we walk sideways down the sidewalks on Wednesday, just to pick something real ridiculous.
Yeah, and they probably would.
Yeah, that's why, you know what, maybe it's not that ridiculous. Anyway, so even if every single Canadian voted, no, we don't want to do that, that's only 36 million people against China has almost 2 billion. India is about 1.5 billion. Pakistan's 1 billion. So you've got half the world's population in just 3 countries. And if they decide that they want to walk sideways down the street on Wednesday, it doesn't matter if the whole country in Canada says screw that. Now, in reality, of course, we could do what we want, because what are they going to do? Come and arrest us all? But the point is the mechanism. You can't hold organizations larger than a nation state to account. And that's the problem with it. So you're seeing these countries coming to this realization that the nation state is the safest or largest organization they can belong to and still have control over. Bigger than that, it falls apart. So they have this trend to reject the failed socialistic programs that promote globalism. They don't like open borders. They don't like uncontrolled immigration. And whether these are real fears or imagined doesn't matter. Perception is reality. So with that said, I think we got time for. Are we taking a break or?
Yeah, we're going to go for a break in a second. Let's pick this conversation up on the other side. We're get up, stretch your legs a little bit, have a glass.
Have some popcorn.
Yeah, Nick's having some popcorn, so you can just sit back and dream of Nick having popcorn. Anyway, we'll be back in a minute. Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone. We're in the home stretch, the final 30 minutes. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and I hit the wrong music there. But anyway, it's okay because I can manually fade it out because I am perfectly competent. And I'm looking at these guys, Nick, they're into the Phoenix system in the chat room.
I see that.
And I'm thinking to myself, okay, we have to do a whole show on Phoenix because it's a terrible, it's an awful problem.
Well, I have a son-in-law who works for the federal government in the Department of Agriculture, and it's driving them crazy because he never knows what his paycheck's going to be. He's hired on a specific rate of pay, and it's for a young guy, he's in his mid-20s. They just got married a few months ago, this summer, as a matter of fact. They just got married, and he's making, for a kid his age, good money, but they can't count on it. They can't budget. They can't set up. If they went out and bought a car, but that's a nightmare because one week you get too much money and you're going to have to, you got to set it aside because at some point they're going to ask for it back. And then the next week you don't get anything or you get very little. So you have no idea how it's going to work.
I know it's terrible.
Yep.
But anyway, guys, look, I'm sorry. We don't want to get into Phoenix tonight, but if you guys really want to spend the next half hour in the chat room talking about Phoenix, we understand.
Go right ahead. We're monitoring.
We understand. And Nick's monitoring closely, and I'm worried about that language. He might have to report this to Statistics Canada because this is vital information. Actually, it is vital information for the government to have.
Yeah, this is actually information they could use.
Yeah.
All right. On another front, now we've covered.
No. We were talking. We have to go back to nationalism.
Okay.
And let's not leave nationalism. Okay.
So I'm going to let you pick up on it.
Okay. Yeah. So So here's the thing: there is nothing that, even if you're talking about the United Nations, okay, there is literally nothing that the United Nations can do without the input of national governments. So everything that's good in the international sphere, winning World War II. Yeah, winning World War II was an alliance, and in fact, that's where the United Nations term comes from originally. Wonderful thing, but the actual heavy lifting, the work, the whether it's in the military sphere or it's in whatever sphere of endeavor, it's the nation, it's the national governments that do it. It's the various nation states. So, when Churchill talked about a collective security, he was talking about nation states coming together and working collectively as nation states. And so nationalism is not a bad thing. It's not even just about loyalty or patriotism. Those are wonderful things. But it's a unit where there's a certain amount of cohesiveness and a certain amount of administrative unity, if you will, and you're able to accomplish certain things. And the nation state, we use the term nation state, but it doesn't have to be a nation state per se, is that there's only one nationality. Justin Trudeau, shortly after he was elected, he gave a speech in New York where he was trumpeting the greatness of Canada as the world's first post-national state. And, there were those of us that were scratching our heads going, okay, I know you're a drama teacher, Justin, but you surely to goodness you took some basic history when you were in school, because the world's one of the world's most successful non-national states is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which encompasses, England, because England is not a country. England is part of Britain,
right,
which is, by the way, the island. So Great Britain is England, Scotland,
Wales.
And Wales. And then the country is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So now you throw in Northern Ireland. So there are four nationalities that make up the United Kingdom. And this is not something that's new.
No, it's about 1,000 years old.
And in fairness, over the 1,000 years, those nations that now today make up the United Kingdom did fight against one another. Okay,
yeah, they even had a civil war.
So and sure, they even had a civil war at one point in time. But the point is that nations are not bad things. Nationalism is not a bad thing. It's like a tool, like everything else. And this whole idea that we're going to break down national barriers. And that's somehow or other going to prevent bad things from happening or whatever. If you're talking about globalism as a means of free and open trade,
that's one thing.
That's one thing. If you're talking about globalism as in eliminating countries, that's a totally different thing altogether. And it's it's interesting that you touched on this, Nick, because maybe you didn't really think about doing this, but insofar as being conservatives, a conservative-minded person is concerned, national entities are very important because they adhere to the principle of subsidiarity, meaning that the bigger the government is, the bigger the scope of government is, or the territory that the government administers. I'm not going to say rules over, but let's call it administers. The less say that individual citizens have over what that government is doing or saying, or what the actions are of the government. So you want government to be broken down into smaller parcels, and you want as much decision-making power to rest as close to the citizens who are living under the administration of a particular government. So you want more local government. And so the idea of having a global government that subsumes or usurps the power of national governments around the world is fundamentally unconservative. It's fundamentally unconservative. And I will argue it's fundamentally undemocratic, because it dilutes the effectiveness of the and power of voters to influence the decisions of the government that they're living under.
And that's the point I was making earlier about your voice and your vote get diluted to the point of being meaningless.
Absolutely.
And this is why countries like the United States have things like the Electoral College. It's why we have power always trending downward to municipal levels. And, the important matters are all done at the municipal levels. Things like the everyday things that affect your life, picking up the garbage, patching the holes in the street, all those kind of things matter to people because they affect their daily lives every day. The higher up the ladder you go, as much as, let's say in my case, I care about defense of the country, it doesn't affect me every day. It's a concern I have, but it's not going to stop me from getting to work in the morning because the price of gas just hit $4 a barrel, or $4 a liter. There's so much power that voters have in democracies because of the way that we run things in a nation state that you lose when you allow outside jurisdictions to meddle in your internal affairs.
Right, and in fairness, again, even I'm speaking simply from a conservative point of view, and I think when I say conservative, it sounds very dogmatic. I don't mean it to, because really it's common sense. But even in a country where here we are, we're defending nationalism, we're defending the nation state, but even in the context of that, having all of the political power concentrated in the national government is fundamentally unconservative. And the reason, and it's fundamentally nonsensical from a democratic point of view,
right?
Because every argument that you're using against a global government on the grounds that it dilutes the power of the vote or the effectiveness or the influence of individual votes, all of that applies in principle to the nation state as well. So the largest governing level that you want is a national government. You don't want an international government.
That's the same point I'm making.
But even within those national government, those national entities or administrative areas or jurisdictions, it still makes sense to push the decision-making down to as low a level as possible, as close a level as possible to the individuals who live within those particular jurisdictions. So the idea of having a city, and where historically you might have had a dozen small towns and villages that slowly grew to the point where they're bumping up against one another.
GTA is a great example.
And now you say, well, we have one urban area, so we should have one government. But that completely eliminates the unique way of doing things that are in the various smaller historic towns and villages that themselves may have grown to cities. And so it's very easy to say, it's very simplistic to say, well, we're going to be more efficient if we eliminate these multiple jurisdictions and just have one jurisdiction. But by doing that, you're creating a situation where everything is uniform, where all of the city workers, for instance, come under one heading. They're all treated the same. And when that happens, okay, the argument has been, well, if we do that, we're going to realize a lot of efficiencies, et cetera. And that's true. But when things settle in terms of wages and in terms of benefits and that to the people you're paying, they automatically settle up. They don't settle down to the lower level. They don't settle at the average of all of the multiple different levels. They settle at the higher level.
Right.
So the net effect is that actually you end up with, in some instances you end up, in some areas you will end up with more efficient government. But for the most part, you end up with less efficient government because the decisions, the government becomes larger, which means that every organization wants to have some system and some uniformity, and it doesn't apply. I'm stumbling along here a little bit because I'm having trouble expressing it, but the fact is that what works here in this neighborhood or in this town doesn't necessarily work over here very well. And so you lose that competitiveness, you lose that ability for the government to respond in a unique fashion to a unique situation. And as a consequence, what appears to be more efficient, in fact, is less efficient. And because everything settles to the higher level in terms of cost as opposed to the lower level, it's more expensive. And then you add on to all of that the more fundamental electoral problem, and that is that the bigger the government, the more that your vote as an individual is diluted, and therefore you have less influence over the decisions that your government is making.
Well, one of the nice things...
I kind of rambled on a little bit around it, but that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I think that to put it in simple terms, which I need to do for my own sake, is... in my town that I live in Killaloe, I can walk down the street and run into the mayor, and I can say, Janice, you need to pave my road, or whatever my issue is. And I get instant feedback.
Or Janice, sorry to interrupt, or Janice, really, we don't need to pave my road.
Either way.
Okay.
Or we got to stop paying $2 a bag to take our garbage to the dump, because it's unfair. We're already paying for it through our property taxes. Why are you taxing me again? In other words, I can talk to my local government, which affects me on a daily basis, face to face, and get instant feedback. The bigger the government gets, the harder that becomes, and it gets to a point where you just can't do it. Imagine walking down the street and seeing the mayor of any major city in this country, or in any part of North America, of a city of more than 300,000, and just casually bumping into them down the street while they're walking to the grocery store. First of all, they don't walk; they send people to do that for them. There's a disconnect between the population and the person that population has put in charge of their financial affairs on a municipal level, and that's why I think in this case, smaller isn't always better. One other just simple example is when you are a farmer and you have a tractor. There are tractors up to 400 or 500 horsepower, okay? And you would think that a big tractor could plow a 5-acre field in absolutely no time at all. And in theory, you're right. But there's logistics get involved, like how do you turn it around at the end of the field? There's a rule of thumb that I usually go by. It says about a horsepower per acre. So if you have a 60-acre farm, you need about a 60 to 65 horsepower tractor. If you're over 100 acres or more, then you start getting into some of these big machinery because it makes sense. It fits the scenario. You can do you can make the machine work most efficiently when you suit it to the size of the job. And when you get back to politics, it's the same thing. Don't have government bigger than it needs to be, given the geographic and the social reality of the area. Like if you had to go with a minimum wage, let the listener chew on this for a little while. Why set it at a provincial level? Why not set it at a municipal one? Because take my area again, Killaloe, Haggerty, Richards, okay, tiny little township, 2,500 people in it. The standard of living there is what it costs to live in that. The cost of living.
The cost of living
is different than it is in downtown Toronto. So why should they set as a minimum wage $15 an hour?
Well, that's a great example, and it's a much better example than anything that I was trying to get out in my own spiel on this subject, Nick. And minimum wage is a beautiful example. So here you have in Ontario. A government passing legislation setting a minimum wage of $15 an hour. Now, at $15 an hour, frankly, it's not enough in the city of Toronto, where the cost of living is a lot higher.
But it's a pretty decent wage in the valley.
Okay, so it really doesn't have as good an effect in Toronto as it ought to. But then you move out to other places outside of the city, where the cost of living is significantly lower. Right. And the $15 an hour now is way beyond anything that's necessary in order to afford to have a decent standard of living in those communities, like the community that you're living in, Nick.
That's exactly right.
So it's the whole idea of subsidiarity is that we recognize that the cookie cutter approach doesn't work, that one size doesn't fit all, really.
Well,
and so as a consequence, we give the opportunity to the people at the lowest level possible, okay? At the lowest level possible, we give them the opportunity to set their own course for their own local government, rather than trying to find a way to consolidate all of the decisions and have one cookie cutter approach to everything.
If people were educated properly in school and took the lessons of communist Russia or the Soviet Union, and because they tried the cookie cutter method, centralized government, everything run out of Moscow. Well, that's fine if you're a Muscovite. But what if you happen to live in Kamchatka on the far eastern shores of Russia, the biggest country in the world? What works in Moscow that won't work out there because the needs are different, the people are different. It's too big. If we'd have taken the lessons of why that system failed and applied those lessons here in Canada, that local regional government is best suited to meet the needs of those people because they're small and fast. Think about a hockey player. If you're a forward, okay, there are forwards out there who are very fast and nimble, and they're not necessarily giants. You know, you don't see 300-pound forwards flying down the ice unless you're Zdeno Chara. But he's the exception to the rule. So somebody who's nimble on their feet, fast and responsive, can change direction in a heartbeat depending on the way the play flows. So if you apply that to a government, a small government with 4 or 5, I go back to my own township, we have about 4 or 5 councilors and a mayor. So if there's something like we had a tornado out our way 10 years ago that ran through a town 20 minutes away called Convermere, and it just leveled that community, tore up the marina, tore down trees, all kinds of damage. They responded within, before the storm was even over. And they started to repair and rebuild right away. And you'd never know today that problem existed. Look at what's going on in Dunrobin right now. They've collected $1.6 million for damage to begin to repair the damage that for those of you not in Ottawa, we had 6 tornadoes here about 6 or 8 weeks ago go through some communities here in Ottawa. Was it that long, 6 or 8 weeks ago? I don't think so. Not quite that long.
Maybe not quite, but it's a month ago anyway, at least.
But they gathered the Red Cross, excuse me, gathered all kinds of money to help people get back on their feet. And to this moment, as of today, they'd only dispersed 200,000 of it. Why? Because the organization is too big, the municipality is too big, and can't respond fast enough. At least that's my interpretation of it.
It's true, and these are. It's not that the people involved are bad. It's that the larger the government, the more systems you have to have in place, the more bureaucracy, the more hoops you have to jump through, the more regulations you have to satisfy, and you can't react to changing circumstances as quickly and as effectively as you can. If you're a smaller, more nimble, more compact organization, which is what a local government should be. But again, I think it's even more fundamental than that. If you raised the question of paving your street as an example,
right,
and then I came in and I said, well, or not, or maybe you don't have to pave the street. Well, here's the reality. The reality is that if the people living in the city of Johnsonville, to pull a name out of the air, invent a town of Johnsonville, that if they feel that they don't need sidewalks on their streets, then they don't build sidewalks in their streets, and maybe they don't pave them to the same standard that the city or the town or the village next door to them would do. Now, if you put those two cities together or those two towns together and you amalgamate them, then the standard now becomes the higher standard. So now, even though people in Johnsonville didn't want, or Johnstown didn't want to have those amenities, collectively, they're going to standardize things and they're going to have those amenities so that the whole town is together. Simple as that.
Did you know there Excuse me. Did you know there's actually a Johnsonville? It's in Wisconsin. And they're famous for their sausage.
It doesn't surprise me in the least.
As soon as you said that, I said, I got to find out if there's a Johnsonville out there. Sure enough, it's in Wisconsin.
But you understand the point I'm making,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. Of course I do.
So, and the question is, well, why, if the people living in Johnsonville don't want to have paved streets or sidewalks in their streets, or they want to repave the streets every 10 years instead of every 3 years, then why shouldn't they make that decision for themselves? And if people decide to live there under those conditions, that's great. And if people decide that they don't want to live there and they're going to move out because the next town over call it Charlottetown or whatever, okay, that they decide, I know he's looking it up, of course there's a Charlottetown.
Yeah, it's in Prince Edward Island.
So if people go, you know what, this is crap. I don't want to live in a community without sidewalks. So they go and they move over to the next one, and then you actually have competition for people who live in those conditions, and it's competition for taxpayers. So, but what is the fundamental reason why everything has to be the same? But if you're going to have one entity, one administrative area, one government, then you're going to have that uniformity. You're going to have that push to have everything at the same standard. And as I said, it never settles lower. It always settles higher.
Yeah.
That is a rule, ironclad administrative rule, okay? So that's why in the end it costs more. And the people who don't care about the sidewalks end up paying for sidewalks that they don't want in their neighborhood.
Or bike lanes.
Or bike lanes, exactly. Don't get me started on bike lanes, Lynn.
We do not.
I just called you Lynn. I meant Nick.
I think I know what you meant. We don't have time to get into bike lanes and the absolute utter waste of time and money.
I left my Prozac at home, so
maybe we'll get into that next week. There's things left over on the list we didn't get to, but I think are important. So maybe next week we can get into. There's a new case about euthanasia out of Nova Scotia,
and there'll be developments on that.
That's right.
Tomorrow, if everything plays out.
Yeah, we'll have a corpse to talk about. As much as that sounds morbid, but in a nutshell, the lady feels like there's a lady in Nova Scotia. It is Halloween.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. I will admit this. I felt kind of bad tonight because I completely forgot it was Halloween. Had no candy. We got one little kid knock at the door, and I heard trick or treat, and I just sat in the basement and I didn't say a thing. Sorry. Anyway,
you evil person.
I know. It is Halloween.
I can't believe you. You sent the little kiddies away without any kind of treat.
I didn't send them away. They just left.
You pretended not to be here.
That's right. I did.
You hid from the kids.
I hid from the kids in the basement. Okay. Anyway, so we'll cover that story next week because it has huge implications and there's plenty of meat on them bones.
Okay, let's see. What do we want to do now? Comments at thecombatzone.ca. That comments at thecombatzone.ca. If you have something you want to say to Nick, especially about the fact that he refused to open his door to little kiddies who just wanted some candy tonight. I mean, that is Ebenezer Scrooge.
It was not on purpose.
Ebenezer Scrooge on Halloween.
Ebenezer Scrooge was evil on purpose.
Ebenezer Scrooge on Halloween.
He's never
as I said, comments at thecombatzone.ca. Hey, and listen, guys, go to Nick's page, his bio, Behind the Mic, and you'll see that you can follow him on Twitter. He wants his followers, the number of followers to get up there. So follow Nick on Twitter, and we'll catch you next week. That's
I gained one.
What?
I gained one.
You gained one. Okay, great.